I've been a locksmith for a little over a decade now. Working this profession, you get to see a different side of people. Their most embarrassing moments, their worst days, the things they cherish deeply. There's plenty of stories to tell, as my husband well knows. He told me I should share some of them with you. You can tell a lot about people from the locks they choose to put on their doors. Some indicate ignorance. Some belong to those interested in tight security. Some tell you about where a person came from. And some locks are just plain weird. There was this one case where I got called out to a family of 3 who had locked themselves out of their own house. According to the mother, they had left their keys in a coat pocket. It was warm weather that day, unusually so for January, so they had gone outside without it and forgotten them. This is the single most common thing I get called out for: plain negligence. I sighed, looking over at their 7-year-old boy who was trying to lure a cat from under a car to pet it. After confirming ownership of the property, I set my toolbox down and took a look at the lock. I paused for a moment before smiling. It was a Wellington 5-lever, old brass, a little oxidized. Now, I live and work in Philadelphia, and I had never seen one of these things in real life before. Broadly speaking, lever locks are more of an old continent thing. They mostly see use in the UK, and even among them, this looked like a more obscure model. I pointed at it and asked the mother about it cheerfully. She just shook her head. "I don't know, miss. It was there when we bought the house." My smile faded slightly. I asked her if she had replaced or rekeyed the lock since moving in. She shook her head again. I cleared my throat and gave her the friendly but firm advice to change them. I can recommend this to everyone. Previous owners don't always have the best security practices regarding their keys. After the short lecture, I inserted the turning tool and tried the levers until I heard the mechanism turn. I pushed the handle down. The door swung inward and a small gust of air blew out. The thing that surprised me was the smell. Spicy, sickly sweet, a hint of fermentation. I recognized it. The smell of something dead. I looked down the hall. The interior was a bit dated. I turned my head towards the family. They were overjoyed, shaking my hand and thanking me profusely. The little boy pushed past me and ran inside. I watched him disappear around a corner. I couldn't help but feel something was wrong. I told them I had to use the bathroom, asked if I could use theirs. They agreed and I entered. The house had an unusual layout. There was a spiral staircase in the middle of the open living room that led up to the loft. The living room was messy. There was a trash bag in the corner and child's toys everywhere. It looked like it hadn't been vacuumed in a while. The smell was coming from upstairs. I ascended the stairs and continued towards the source. It was coming from a closet at the back of the hall that connected the living room to the second-floor bedrooms. I walked down the hall and put my hand on the knob. I waited for a moment, then turned. On the floor was a cat. It had been dead for a while. Maggots nibbled at its partially desiccated body. The smell hit me like a truck, overwhelming. I stared at it for a moment longer than I needed to. A small thing, trapped in a dark place it couldn't get out of. No one had heard it. No one had come looking. I hurried back downstairs. The parents had settled into the living room, looking up at me as I came down the staircase. I panted for a moment and told them their cat was dead. They stared at me. "We don't own a cat," the mother asserted. I wasn't sure if I should laugh. I opened my mouth, closed it. In the end, I just led them up the stairs, flinging open the closet in front of their eyes. They didn't say anything for a moment, just stood there. The mother looked away, clearly disturbed. Then the arguing started. They assured me, no, insisted that they had never had a cat. Not only that, they said they had never seen this one before. Not in the neighborhood. Never. In this line of work, you get a sense for when people are bullshitting you. I could tell this wasn't that. This was something else. I believed them. I stared at it for a moment longer than I needed to. It's a bad way to go, getting trapped somewhere with no way out. Sometimes there's nobody to open the door. I wonder what that must feel like. To this day, I don't know how the poor thing made it into that house, up the stairs and into a closet, without the residents ever noticing. nor do I know who closed the door behind it. For their sake, I hope they replaced their locks. I've learned a rule of thumb working this job. The stronger the lock, the stranger the case. The previous story was a good example of that. Lever locks are secure by their obscurity. Unfortunately, I've encountered that specific lock twice since, both under worse circumstances. I don't want to write about those cases. Instead, I want to write about an experience that still gives me a watched feeling from time to time when I'm alone at night. It was 3 a.m. I got called out of bed by a client claiming to have been locked out of their house. Same as usual. I grumbled and got out of bed, cursing our 24-hour policy and driving over to the address provided to me. It was way out there, near the edge of the Wharton State Forest, a long road. I eventually passed the entry sign. Took me nearly an hour to get there. I almost thought I had the wrong address. A little past 4 in the morning, I found it. An old townhouse. 3 units side by side, just off a dead-end road that trailed into the woods. Dutch-looking architecture, or close enough to it. Like something pulled from an old-fashioned town center, except this was in the middle of the forest. For reference, every house I passed up until this point was a standard single-story suburban unit. I stopped my car and got out. It was cold. I rubbed my hands together and zipped up my coat. The only sound was the wind. No insects, no animals. Just the occasional rustling of the trees overhead. I felt uneasy from the moment I got out of the car. I turned on my flashlight and pointed the beam towards the house, nearly jumping when I saw the person standing in front. It was the young man who had called. He was about my height, a bit chubby with round glasses. He stood at the bottom step to one of the units. I wondered how long he'd been standing there in the dark. I approached and greeted him, coming up the steps and staring at the townhouses all the while. He smiled and thanked me for coming. I pointed at the houses and asked how he ended up here, living in the middle of the woods. He shrugged and said the rent was cheap, that the forest and hiking trails were a nice bonus. I asked him what the story behind this bizarre building was. He just shrugged and said he didn't know either. I was getting increasingly suspicious the more he talked. He seemed oddly distant. I got the distinct impression he was hiding something. The state of the townhouses didn't help the matter. They looked abandoned. My initial assumption was he was looking to squat there, but now I'm not so sure. I asked him for proof of ownership. He shook his head, and with a solemn face told me everything was inside. He said it like that. Emphasis on everything. I narrowed my gaze, looked at the door. The lock was a Medico high-security tumbler mechanism. I recognized it immediately. It's the kind that jumps out to you in this field. It told me whoever put it there really cared about security and was willing to pay hand over fist for it. I looked back at the young man who was staring up at the building with a warm expression as if it were a beautiful sunset. I followed standard protocol, asked him if, in lieu of documentation, he could describe the interior. He looked back at me, smiled, and nodded. So, there's an entryway that leads into the living room. I nodded, grabbing my notepad and starting to write. It's more deep than wide. There's a kitchen in the back and a rear-view window. The second floor has a bedroom. I stopped writing. He was describing every townhouse ever. None of this gave me other than a vindication of the bad gut feeling I had been getting. No, sir. I need details. Can you be specific? He stopped for a moment. His face got very serious. I half expected him to get upset at me. A liar caught in the act. Instead, like a switch turning, he went back to his warm smile and looked back at the house. Of course, my mistake. Quite all right, I said, grasping my pen a little tighter. Let's try again. He tilted his head slightly like he was trying to remember something he knew perfectly well. The entryway has hardwood floors. There's a scratch near the front door, a long one, like something heavy was dragged across it. The walls are painted in off-white, not quite cream. Someone painted over the original color and didn't do a great job of it. You can still see the old color near the baseboards if you look closely. I wrote it down. My hand had slowed. The living room has a couch against the left wall, dark green. One of the cushions doesn't sit right. The stuffing's gone flat on the right side." He paused. "There's a bookshelf, more decorative than functional. A few paperback sci-fi novels, some picture frames. One of them is face down." I stopped writing. He said all of this the way you'd describe a painting you'd spent a long time standing in front of. Fond, unhurried. I stayed absolutely still, hanging on to every word. "There's an alien poster in the master bedroom, an assorted calligraphy set, an unfinished drawing of a park with a cartoon emu in the middle. That's about it." My breathing grew shallow. I just kind of stood there, looking at him. He had described my house, my bedroom, my drawing, the face-down picture. Every single detail was perfect. I nearly dropped my pen. He still had that distant, fond look on his face. He looked as if he had described his childhood home. My jaw clenched. I excused myself for a moment, went around the corner and quickly dialed my colleague's number. I wasn't sure what to say to him. I just told him something was wrong with the client and to come quickly. He said he understood, promised me he'd be there soon. I put my phone down, texted him the address, and turned the corner. The client wasn't there anymore. I looked around. Just empty forest, gravel road, and the building beside me. Called his name. Nothing. I spent a few minutes shining my flashlight around, hoping to catch another glimpse of him. I didn't see a sign of him. No vehicle either. Eventually, I gave up and just sat in my own car waiting for Paul. 30 minutes later, I saw the headlights of his car coming down the road. He got out. I told Paul what happened. He was as unnerved by the sight of the random townhouses as I was. Still, we were curious. After some deliberation, we agreed to unlock it. It would be an actual challenge for once, considering the lock in question. Those high-security things take a while. You sort of have to rotate the pins in a way that's really hard to do, even with our specialized equipment. The first light of dawn was turning the sky a deep purple by the time we got it open. I gave Paul a high five and we turned the handle, entering inside. It was empty. I don't mean it was unremarkable, I mean it was completely empty. No furniture, no wallpaper, no upper floors or any staircases leading up there. Just empty space starting from the foundation and going up to the roof 3 stories up. Like someone built the exterior as a facade to hide something. Except there was nothing to hide, just a void where an interior should have been. The longer I stood inside, the more I got the feeling I wasn't supposed to be there. The kind of feeling you'd get if you were trespassing onto government property. The kind of feeling that screams you're not alone. Paul and I didn't say anything. We just looked at each other, backed out, got into our cars, and drove home. I spent the rest of the night with the locks of my own house. I rekeyed everything in silence. I tested the old keys to make sure they didn't work anymore, glancing over at the scratch near the entryway and latching the deadbolt as I did. People are a lot like locks. Everyone has their own mechanism of action. A hidden key. If you know how to unlock them, you've effectively solved how to deal with them. Everyone has desires, fears, secrets they would never tell anyone. Figure out how they tick, and you can be their best friend, their strongest business partner, or their worst enemy. I was supervising Paul as he tried to sell a pair of locks to a 50-something-year-old gentleman. The customer was continuously convinced Paul was trying to upsell him. "I just want a lock, damn it," he insisted. Paul, oblivious, kept trying to explain the pros and cons of each one. Each time he did, the man got more agitated. I stifled a laugh. Eventually, I put an arm on Paul's shoulder, took him in the back, and told him to pick out the cheapest, shittiest lock he could find. He did, and the two of us returned and presented it to him. "About damn time," the man said, tossing a wad of $1 bills on the counter. "Have a good day, sir." He mumbled something and left in a huff. The moment the door closed behind him, I began laughing. Paul quickly joined in. A credit card or a firm yank would get past that thing. Our shared amusement was interrupted by the phone. I picked up. A woman answered. She said she had been locked out of her home and needed help getting back in. Her voice sounded stiff, controlled. I told her I would be right there. I turned to Paul, asking him not to burn the place down. He helpfully replied he would not try to rub 2 keys together like fire starters. I grinned. When I arrived, I was surprised to see a man in his mid-30s sitting out on the steps, smoking a cigarette thoughtfully. He had black hair, a bit of stubble, and the expression of someone too tired to do anything but sit there. I double-checked the address. This was it. I walked up slowly and greeted him. He seemed distant, taking another puff before answering. I asked him if he needed help getting the lock open. I guess. Strange. Not often I get called over to help someone get in and arrive to find a completely different person outside. I asked him for proof of ownership. He didn't hesitate. He unlocked his phone and showed me the lease. 2 people. His name was Thomas. The other was Sarah. I presumed she was the one who called. I asked him if Sarah was home. He shrugged. I walked up and rang the doorbell. Waited a minute. No response. I looked back at the man. He had put out his cigarette and was just staring off into space now. I paused for a moment, too. The sight felt so surreal. I looked back at the door, took a better look at the lock. It was worn. The wood around it was scraped and damaged. It looked like it had been replaced, poorly and more than once. I sat down next to him. "How long have you lived here, Thomas?" His eyes darted to one side for a moment. 7. "Years?" I asked. He turned his head to look at me, tilted it a little. "Months." We sat in silence for a moment, listening to the wind. After what felt like a century, Thomas asked me a question. "You ever been in love?" I thought for a moment. "You could say that." Thomas looked forward down the steps. "With a man? A woman?" I turned my head slightly. "I don't judge." Thomas shrugged. "With a lock," I answered. Thomas smirked a little. "Have you ever heard of the Mole T-Lock MT5 Plus? The keys are 3-dimensional. They unlock 2 sets of pins at once, one at the bottom, one at the side." Thomas nodded along slowly. "It's the most complicated lock I've ever worked with. Picking it feels beyond me. When you look at a mechanism like that for long enough, you start to appreciate the exterior qualities of it. The smoothness of its design, the little quirks, the way the mortise locks perfectly into the wood of the door." Thomas paused for a moment, beginning to understand. "Does the lock love you back?" I leaned back slightly. "I think so. It's hard to tell. I can only look through the keyhole." The 2 of us sat in silence for another minute or so. A child blew past us on a bicycle. One of the neighbors put the trash out. A crow flew overhead. "She gets this dimple," Thomas started, touching his right cheek, "on the side of her face when she smiles." I turned to him. He was staring into the distance again, an expression as if he were witnessing a slow-motion tragedy far away and was powerless to stop it. He asked, almost inaudibly, "I wonder what happened to it?" I stayed silent. "She does this thing when she finds something funny. She starts snickering before she even gets to the punchline." He almost smiled. "Can't help herself." Thomas sighed. "She's the smartest person I've ever met. Not book smart, necessarily. Just walks into a room and reads it in 10 seconds flat." He paused. "I've never been able to do that. I say the wrong thing at the wrong time. I don't always know when to push and when to leave well enough alone." He picked at a thread on his sleeve. "I guess I knew it was going to be like this from the first," Thomas muttered. "Thought it was just the stress of moving. Thought we'd get over it. Deep down, I knew better." He was starting to choke up. Several seconds passed before he continued. "Every time she avoided me, it felt like I had broken something. I never knew what it was until it was too late. I'm starting to think, it's me. I'm the mistake. God." Thomas began to sob into his hands in a way that almost sounded like a laugh. I reached out a hand toward his shoulder, but stopped before touching him. I pulled back. I sat there, watching the sun set for a long while as Thomas's sobs grew quieter. Eventually, the weeping turned to sighs, and the sighs to silence. I sat there for a little while still. The clouds were painted in orange and pink hues contrasting against the sky's deep indigo. I wish I didn't have to love, Thomas whispered. I looked down and pursed my lips. My toolbox sat motionless on the steps. I grabbed it and began unlocking the door. Thomas sat by quietly. After a minute or so, I was done. I swung the door open, which turned directly into the living room. Sarah sat at the table looking at me. Her eyes were red. I understood then. She could have opened it, physically speaking. Instead, she called me. I didn't stay long. I got my payment and went home, glancing over my shoulder as the door closed behind Thomas. I drove home, staring out at the road. 30 minutes felt like hours. When I finally parked, I sat in the car for a moment, watching the porch light. Barbara had left one on for me. She always did. I entered without a sound, throwing my coat over the rack carelessly. The apartment was dark. The last train had already passed. The walls blocked out the traffic, leaving the interior in silence. On the couch was a figure. He sat perfectly still in the darkness, the only light from the window. It stopped just short of his face. I closed the door behind me and sat down next to him. Then I lowered my head onto his lap. He didn't react. "How was your day?" I asked. He didn't respond. I nodded. "Are you hungry, Emmerich? I was thinking I could get us takeout. Thai, maybe. Or I could make something." He didn't respond. "Thai it is." I turned onto my side, the vase of roses on the coffee table. Barbara. She'd been the best caretaker I'd ever met. I stared at the petals for a while, then reached out and touched one. It was starting to brown at the edge. I turned back, lying on my spine, looking at the ceiling. "I had an interesting case today," I said. "You'd like this one?" I shifted, getting comfortable. Family of 3, locked out of their house. The kid was trying to lure a cat out from under a car. The lock was a Wellington 5 lever, old brass. I'd never seen one before. I waited. Sometimes he made a sound, a tiny exhale that might have been a laugh. Not tonight. "You're so quiet. You had so much more to say yesterday." He didn't respond. I sat up slowly. On the nightstand beside the couch, he slept here now. It was easier than the bedroom. There was a glass of water. The surface was perfectly still. I stared at it, willing a ripple. Nothing. You'd talk to a deadbolt before you'd talk to me. He'd said that 7 years ago, standing in the doorway with a suitcase, the argument still hot in the air. He'd been right. I'd spent so many nights in the workshop, picking a Medeco just to feel something click into place while he sat alone in the dark. I stood up and walked to the kitchen, poured myself a glass of water. Didn't drink it, just held it. When I came back, I sat on the floor in front of him, my back against the couch, my head just below his hand. His fingers were warm. They didn't move. "I'm sorry," I whispered. The words hung there, too small, too late, said too many times. I looked over at the face-down picture of the two of us. I wondered if the townhouse client had known about Emmerich's condition too. I got up, locked the front door, and came back to the couch. The room was quiet. Outside, a car passed. I closed my eyes. When I opened them, the water glass on the nightstand was casting a small reflection on the wall. The streetlight bent through the glass. It trembled slightly. Maybe from a passing truck, maybe not. I watched it until it stilled. I lay down beside him, my hand on his chest, feeling the slow rise and fall of a man trapped in his own body. Between us sat the only lock I'd never been able to open. "Thai tomorrow," I whispered. "Tonight, I'll just stay here."